Hello everyone! So this week I wanted to do a sort of Q&A around the PGCE because 2 years ago I did a video about the PGCE, which is basically a teaching degree in the UK, which I did, I believe, 5 years ago. And in this video, there was a lot of questions in the comment section, and I thought that instead of replying individually to the questions, I would just make a video where I just sort of gather all the main questions I got asked. And by the way, I watched again the video I did about the PGCE 2 years ago, and I looked like I was gonna fall asleep. I'm not sure what happened then, but anyway, before I start, I just want to put out some disclaimer, which is that all the information I will give to you in this video is, I hope, to the best of my knowledge, accurate, but it's important that you check with specific universities in case what they do is different from my experience with my university. So take everything with a pinch of salt, but obviously I'm trying to give the most accurate answer I possibly can, but still double check just in case. And also, because I'm only a former PGCE student, I never worked for a university, I might not know all the details behind how to sign up. So if you have a very specific case, then it's probably best for you that you ask the university rather than ask me, because I probably won't know the answer. So let's get started. So the first question I got asked often is the difference between PGCE and QTS. I know when you start researching about the PGCE, you see a lot of acronyms and it's super confusing. But QTS essentially is Qualified Teacher Status, and it's something that you should get if you pass the PGCE at the end of your PGCE. And it just means that you're able to teach officially. The PGCE is not the only way to get QTS. I don't know much about this, but I know there's other ways. With other degrees, you can, if you come from another country, you could get QTS with a degree from your home country, I think, but I'm not sure. So if you want to check whether your home country degree qualifies for a QTS, then you need to check with official bodies, I imagine. I don't have the authority or the knowledge to tell you if your degree is valid or not. And then the PGCE is basically just the name of the degree, and the PGCE should lead you to having QTS. So they're not technically the same thing, even if with the PGCE you normally get QTS. Second question, can you teach abroad with a PGCE? The answer is probably no. And it's very important when you start your PGCE that you don't assume with it you will be able to teach in any other country, because I don't think it's actually possible to teach with the PGCE outside of England, maybe in the countries that belong to the Commonwealth, but I'm not even sure about this, so you need to really double check, because I have a lot of people that say, oh, after the PGCE I want to teach in France, but no, it's not going to work. The only sort of situation where you could use a PGCE to teach abroad is if you are working for something that's not by the government, so private schools or independent schools. But if you want to work for the government, for example, in France, you couldn't do that. You would have to do a separate degree, which we call CAPES, so C-A-P-E-S. And yeah, the PGCE is not recognized by the government. So yeah, don't just assume you will be able to teach everywhere because you might not be able to. And I think it sort of makes sense in a way, because it is true that on the one hand you have the experience of teaching, but to be fair, the way things are taught in England is quite different from other countries for sure. So it does kind of make sense that there's no direct equivalency, or like you can't really transfer it to another country. But I don't know, I mean, there's not much I can say about it, it's just how it is essentially. So just be careful about that and check beforehand if you're planning to go teach in another country after your PGCE. Now the third question that I got asked quite a few times is, how do you get the bursary for the PGCE? So if you don't know about it, for most courses you get some money, which is, by the way, tax-free, so you don't pay it back later and you don't get taxed on it. All the money goes to you basically. And to get this bursary, it might depend on the university, but if I remember well, in my university they just gave us a form that we fill in, then you just return it and then they dealt with it. But I don't know if all universities do it. In my might be that they don't always do it, so you just have to ask. It's not just going to happen. You really need to ask about it if they don't sort of mention it. So yeah, so just make sure you are on it. But to be fair, the PGCE has so much paperwork before you sign up that actually it's better that you start applying super early, like maybe even more than 6 months. Because what happened in my situation was that I applied in June for September, but there was kind of a particular situation because I was applying to the uni where I was doing my Erasmus, so it was kind of easy for them because they had my file or whatever. But if you don't study already at the university, it might be a great idea to apply super early on, like maybe a year before. That would be ideal because there's so much stuff you need to do. And if you're not English, like me, or if you're French or foreign, then there's going to be a lot of documents which you'll have to translate, do equivalency of your grades, which I will talk about in a bit. And yeah, it's not easy. It takes a bit of time to sort of understand where to go to get things done, essentially. So definitely don't leave it at the last minute. The next question is how intensive is the PGCE? I mean, I'm going to be biased, probably because I had a fairly bad experience in my PGCE. That's a whole nother topic, but essentially it's extremely intense. Like, I honestly think if you spend less than 50 hours a week studying during your PGCE, you can consider yourself lucky because there's so much work. It's incredible. I mean, I'm not going to argue of, whether it's, it makes sense or it's logical. I don't think it is logical to work so hard. And I definitely think that they make the PGCE harder than it should be. But just to give you an idea, I made a note of this. So essentially the workload you have is obviously your lessons. And what I think takes the most time is actually lesson planning, because if you have no experience in teaching, like I didn't when I started, then it's quite difficult to get your head around how to do the lesson. So it takes a lot of time. I remember my first lesson, it took me 4 hours to plan it. And that was an hour lesson. It's ridiculous. Now with experience, I would not spend more than half an hour or 40 minutes, hopefully. But at first, it's really difficult. And you have many classes and it's just quite difficult. And then on top of that, we had a lot of paperwork. The paperwork essentially was to make us reflect on our teaching, which I think is useful to some extent, but we did it so often that because we didn't have time, what happened is that you just sort of rush it. You don't actually reflect properly. You just fill in the paperwork for the sake of filling in the paperwork. So you don't actually do anything productive. But anyway, that's how it is. And then, yeah, so you have to do like lots of forms where you have to answer questions like, how do you think you did in this lesson? What do you think you could have improved? And because you have, at the end of the PGCE, about 12 hours of lessons, you have to do 12 forms. I mean, I had to. So that's super tedious, and that takes a few hours every week. Other things as well on top of that is the coursework. There's quite a bit of coursework. I know I had to do an essay of 5,000 words, and that takes a lot of time because you have to do research. It's not just writing words. You have to do a bit of research. And then at the end of the year, you also have to gather evidence against teacher standards. That's a bit complicated for me to explain this video, but hopefully if you do the PGCE, they will explain it to you. But essentially it takes a few more hours, and basically there's always something to do and you're always going to be working. So if you want to do a PGCE, think about the fact that you're not going to have time to just chill when you come to England. If you come from abroad, you might not have the time to see your friends and family much because you will be working so hard. And yeah, your life will just be very busy, and you will basically be in a bubble and quite shut off from the world, I think. But I think it's worth it because obviously I'm very happy I did my PGCE, but it's really hard work, and don't underestimate it because I did and I kind of regretted it, but it really is hard work. The fifth question I got asked a lot was regarding English proficiency and grade equivalency. So English proficiency is for non-native speakers. So if you're a native speaker of English, then obviously you don't need one. But if you're a non-native speaker, you might have to do a proficiency test. Personally, I didn't do one because I did a degree in English, and also when I applied for the PGCE, I was already studying in the same university. So I think they assumed if I had been accepted in my Erasmus and then did spend a year and did well in my subjects, then they probably assumed I could speak English. So I think that's why I got away with it. But I can't really inform you on this one specifically. You just have to ask the university. Most of the information really you should ask the university, but here in this video I'm hoping to give you a general idea and expectations of the kind of things you would be doing in the PGCE. But yeah, so I don't have much experience of this in particular. But as for grade equivalency, again, if you're not from the UK, then often you see a lot of things about having a 2-2, so 2.2, 2.1, so 2.2 and 2.1, and then a first or whatever. And if you're French like me, or maybe not English, I don't know how that works in other countries, but for you guys and me, that didn't make sense. And essentially, I will put a link in the description box below where you will see a website which tells you what's the equivalence of the 2.2, 2.1, etc. to your own country. So you just have to scroll through the page and then just find your country. So yeah, that's basically it for that question. But essentially the reason why you need to know the equivalency is for the bursary, because they will look at your grades to see how much money you will get. And again, to know how much money you will get, you have to look it up. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description box below. But last time I checked, which was 2 years ago, I doubt it's changed too much. But I know for languages, it was 25K, which is a lot of money. If you had a master's or if you had a first, but I think you still got a lot of money if you had a 2.2, so which is like the lowest, not lowest, but like the lowest of the highest, I guess I could say. So yeah. And then 6th question is, what degree should you do before PGCE? In theory, and to my knowledge, any degree is fine, absolutely any degree. Now, obviously, if you're going to do languages, I think it makes more sense for you to have done at least a language at university, so you have the subject knowledge. I think is quite important. But I know in my course there were people that did psychology and they were doing languages. Others did history, so it's not directly related. I mean, because they didn't formally learn grammar or like, I don't know, phonology or something language related specifically. But I think it's okay. I mean, it's up to you. I do think it's better to consider doing a degree in the subject you want to teach, because that gives you subject knowledge, and then it's going to be easier. Because if you don't have the subject knowledge, then during the PGCE, which, as I said, is extremely intense, then you have to catch up on the things you don't know. So that just adds up to your workload. So I don't recommend it, but obviously, if you're really motivated to be a teacher, who am I to tell you not to do it? Obviously, but just bear that in mind. That will be a little bit more difficult if you don't have the subject knowledge. And the last question I wanted to answer is, how do they test your subject knowledge? So I only did a PGCE in MFL, so modern foreign languages, so I can't really answer for any other subjects, but I'm guessing it's going to be similar. But basically, obviously, they didn't assess my French because I'm a native speaker, but they did assess my Spanish, because when you do MFL, so languages, you do 2 languages normally. I think it's possible to only do 1, but I think pretty much all of my friends in the course were doing 2 languages, so I think that's the norm. And for the Spanish, I was quite surprised because the way they assessed it was quite easy. I mean, there was 2 things. One was like an interview where I think they were just sort of, I don't know, making sure everything was okay with like my the paperwork, if everything was fine, checking just like how my placements were going. And then I had someone asking me 2 questions in Spanish. I can't remember exactly the questions, but the questions were like, ¿Qué te gusta hacer durante las vacaciones? And ¿Qué te gusta hacer durante el fin de semana? So it's basically like, what do you like to do during your holidays and what do you like to do during the weekend? Or what are your hobbies, or like whatever, that kind of question. So it's kind of like, okay, are you assessing whether I can teach Spanish based on these 2 questions? I don't know. I think maybe I came across as fluent, so they were just like, yeah, it's fine. But I don't know. I don't feel like it's very thorough.
Actually, to be honest, I forgot to mention that in the interview, I did do a written test, which was basically a reading comprehension with a translation. But I never actually heard back from it, and I don't really know what the point was, because, as I'm going to say afterwards, there are some people that started the PGCE with 0 subject knowledge in their second language, and that was fine. They could still do it. So I really am not sure about the value of the test I took, because I was never given any feedback, and it was never mentioned ever again.
And even I know some people in my course, they were teaching Spanish, and then they were doing French as their secondary language, so their weakest language, if I may say. And they actually had never done French before, so they learned French as they were teaching it. So when they started to teach in October, they had started learning French in September, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable teaching a language if I have been learning it for a month. I mean, that sounds crazy to me. but it's possible. So if you're okay with that challenge, I guess, then that's fine. I know I didn't like teaching Spanish, not because of the language, because I can speak it quite well, but I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't have like very good vocab and grammar, so that I found it difficult. So yeah, I find it surprising that some people, after only learning a language for a month, can teach it, but that's how it is. So yeah, I think that's it for this last question, and that's actually it for the video. I hope you found it helpful. Do ask questions in the comment section. I prefer if you ask them in the comment section rather than on Facebook or Twitter, because then I can, people can just refer to your question and hopefully find the answer. But do ask questions. I try to reply to them regularly. I reply to all comments usually. It's quite rare that I don't respond. And yeah, I hope you found it helpful, and I will see you later. Bye!